Hello, I'm Darren Jordan. This is Al Jazeera, live from Doha. Coming up in the program, the US fires missiles at an oil tanker it says was violating a naval blockade on Iranian ports. Iran fires more missiles at regional Gulf countries. Tehran says it's in an existential war with America. The US says Israel and Lebanon are moving towards an Israeli troop withdrawal from southern Lebanon, but there have been more attacks in the region. And in sport, Lionel Messi inspires Argentina to victory as they beat England to reach the World Cup final. The US military says it's disabled an oil tanker attempting to sail towards an Iranian port in the Strait of Hormuz. US Central Command says the Curacao-flagged tanker was on its way to Karg Island when it was targeted with missiles. CENTCOM says the commercial vessel had ignored multiple warnings and tried to violate the US blockade. 2 other commercial vessels have also been redirected from Iranian ports since Washington's blockade was reimposed on Tuesday. Well, the US military has also carried out another wave of strikes on southern Iran. Iranian state media report explosions have been heard near the port cities of Bandar Abbas and Sirik. CENTCOM says the attacks are aimed at limiting Iran's ability to attack commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's health ministry says at least 35 people have been killed since the start of the recent escalation over the key waterway. Well, President Donald Trump says Iran will soon be defeated. He's also downplayed the conflict's impact on global energy markets after a surge in oil prices.
The country is booming, and we'll have Iran defeated soon. They'll be defeated very soon. And then I guess it'll be even better. But, you know, even during this, it's been amazing. I mean, to think, so I call it a military operation, but call it whatever you want. It's incredible. It hasn't made a dent. A lot of people thought oil would go up to $350 a barrel, and today it's at $79. A couple of days ago, it was at $68. It went up a little bit because I had to take tough action because they did not obey what they're supposed to obey. I mean, they just didn't do it. So we took a little action.
Meanwhile, Tehran has launched a series of strikes across the Gulf region. Kuwait says it's intercepted 4 missiles and 21 drones on Wednesday. Jordan and Bahrain have also intercepted Iranian attacks. Iran's Revolutionary Guard says it targeted US military assets in these countries. Well, the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman says that Tehran will commit to the ceasefire agreement if Washington also abides by it.
From the very beginning, we have said commitment in return for commitment. What does that mean? That means we will fulfill our commitments if other party is committing to them. The other party violated them, and in return, we refrain from implementing our commitments wherever necessary. This is our principle, and we will continue on the same path.
Well, our correspondents are following the latest developments from Tehran, Doha and Washington, D.C. Let's begin there, though, with Mike Hanna. Mike, the U.S. has launched a 3rd wave of strikes over the past 24 hours. What are you hearing there from the U.S. military, Mike?
Well, US Central Command CENTCOM says that it is once again striking at targets associated with Iran's attempts to control the Strait of Hormuz. These targets typically involve Coast Guard stations, drone batteries, missile batteries. So this is ongoing now. It is now been continuing for a number of days, these daily strikes being carried out by the US military. So this is something that President Trump says will go on, and he is indicated too that it may even extend further than the current range of targets moving into Iran's interior, should he not get some kind of deal or some kind of agreement in the next few days.
Mike, stay with us. Let's bring in Tawhid Asadi. He joins us live now from Tehran. Tawhid, so what are you hearing there in Iran about how intense these American strikes are?
Well, it's yet another night of American strikes targeting Iranian southern coast in different strategic locations. We've got the latest from Qishm Island, the largest island in the vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz, where explosions are reported. Also in Bandar Abbas. We've got similar reports about explosions. Again, another important port city for the country in Sirik, which oversees the Strait of Hormuz. We've got explosion sounds. Also in southeastern parts of the country in Sistan province, we've got Chabahar and Konarek, and also actually Rosk city, in which explosions are reported. In Ahvaz, we've got several explosions over the past few hours, in one of which a hospital was targeted, or at least was impacted, as a result of which that was evacuated. And we've got reports about damage to the cancer treatment, the child cancer treatment on that hospital. That's something that we heard from the health ministry of the country, which also came out to give a number of the latest actually casualties over the past few days since the initiation of this recent round of strikes, saying that so far more than 300 people have been injured and at least 35 people have been killed as a result.
Primeiro, você precisa de processos integrados, gestão financeira estruturada e pelo menos 3 sistemas para te atender. Com o sistema de gestão certo, você alcança os melhores resultados.
OMIE, o sistema de gestão número 1 das PMEs.
Chegou o Aptanutri Pro Gold, a melhor fórmula 1+ para o desenvolvimento e imunidade do seu filho.
Flex their muscles when it comes to their sovereign rights that they are claiming over these 3 islands. And of course, it goes without saying that in terms of the geostrategic significance, we know that alongside other islands such as Qeshm, these are important, seeing the actually control and authority that Iran is claiming for when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. And also we know that it's militarily important, being considered as a forward military outpost as well as a part of a layered defense system in these islands, and the control over these islands plays a pivotal role when it comes to the control and regional influence for the country in this intricate situation. Let's just keep in mind that Iranians are talking about a new management, a new authority over the Strait of Hormuz. They're saying that the situation there is not going to get back to the time before the initiation of the war. And when it comes to practicing this claim, those islands, also other coastal areas, are now more and more important.
All right, Tawhid Asadi, live for us there in Tehran. Tawhid, thank you. Let's bring in Zain Basravi from here in Doha. Zain, so Iran has continued attacking countries in the Gulf today. What more can you tell us, Zain?
Well, with U.S. strikes, we've seen retaliatory strikes once again by Iran on U.S. assets in Gulf Arab states. We've seen attacks on Jordan, Kuwait, and Bahrain today. A few hours ago, there were air raid sirens going off in Bahrain. And within the last hour, Kuwait has announced the air defenses are currently responding to hostile drone threats. The General Staff of the Kuwaiti Armed Forces confirms that any explosions that may be heard are the result of air defense systems intercepting hostile targets. Now, that is certainly there to allay fears of the people living in Kuwait of what they are hearing. Air defenses going off. We've heard similar announcements anytime there are attacks on Gulf Arab states. But we also know from the early days of the war, the reports that followed after, that as Iran continues strikes throughout the day, multiple drones, multiple missiles, what it is trying to do is zero in on U.S. military personnel, U.S. assets on the ground, of which there are thousands in these 3 countries that came under attack today, and we do know that they do tend to cause damage when they do hit. So what we are hearing are defensive weapons going off, but no doubt Iran trying to continuously zero in with those strikes that it has continued to carry out throughout the course of these days and nights.
All right, Zain, stay with us. Let's go back to Mike Hanna in Washington. Mike, so President Trump has been talking about the Iranian negotiators at an event in Pennsylvania. What's his messaging?
Well, he's saying that there is still some kind of dialogue going on. He repeated what he said some 24 hours ago, that his people, as he put it, have been talking to their people, indicating or implying that there is an avenue of dialogue which exists between the US administration and the Iranian administration. But I must just mention a rare expression of gratitude by President Trump to Iran. This has happened in the last 12 minutes, where on his Truth Social, he's posted a report saying Iran has allowed an American citizen who was wrongfully detained in December of 2024 to leave the country. She is now safely outside of Iran and in good condition. He continues, the United States of America appreciates this gesture of goodwill by Iran. So, rare expression of gratitude by President Trump at a time that relations between the US and Iran continue to intensify, as does the ongoing conflict.
All right, Mike Hanna, live for us here in Washington. Mike, thank you. Let's go back to Zain Basravi here in Doha. Zain, so are Gulf states still happy to mediate between the US and Iran, given this ongoing escalation?
I think happy is a difficult word to use in this scenario. Gulf states have no choice. They have to mediate. They are stuck in the middle of this geographically, politically, militarily, and not mediating means simply allowing the conflict to escalate unchecked. And at the moment, looking at the field of play, it does seem to be that the hawks in Tehran and Washington are the ones leading the charge as to how this conflict plays out, the direction of this conflict. It is continuing to escalate. Things are continuing to get worse for 4 or 5 days in a row now. The U.S. continuing to carry out new waves of strikes, and Tehran responding with retaliatory attacks on U.S. assets in neighboring Arab countries. So mediating countries right now, Oman and Qatar are leading the charge. Certainly other countries, the GCC, are certainly in charge, but heavily critical of Iran's continuous retaliatory attacks. Are they happy to continue to mediate? There is no other option. But is mediation really working? Nothing seems to have stuck so far. The memorandum of understanding seems to be on the back burner. Any sort of dialogue seems to be taking a back seat to what we are continuing to see as open conflict, a return to hostility, and continuous escalation of these strikes in Gulf Arab states. So what the mediators do next will matter. One point of perhaps, one positive point perhaps, is that the Speaker of Parliament of Iran has said that this is an existential crisis. On the day that we saw Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister, visit Qatar, a GCC country, to give condolences for the death of the father Emir, who passed away a few days earlier, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani. Now, this was a conciliatory visit. This was one for but it is significant as an illustration that there remains some sort of diplomatic connective tissue between a GCC country, between Qatar and Iran. That discussed peace talks, whether or not they discussed a memorandum of understanding. These are all open questions. But the fact that there was a diplomatic visit, even at a time of escalated tensions, that is certainly something positive. But we're looking at breadcrumbs at this stage. If these two sides, the U.S. and Israel on one side, continue to attack, and if Iran continues to retaliate, then it will become more and more difficult for mediators to try to find an off-ramp.
All right, Al Jazeera's Zain Basravi, live for us here in Doha. Zain, thank you. Now, the US says Israel and Lebanon have agreed on the structure and guidelines for a limited Israeli troop withdrawal from southern Lebanon. It follows 2 days of talks in Rome. US officials say the withdrawal process will be finalized and implemented in the coming days. The memorandum of understanding signed between Washington and Tehran in June agreed to end fighting on all fronts, including in Lebanon. Well, under the US-brokered framework deal signed at the end of June, troops would hand over control of some territory in southern Lebanon to Lebanese forces. Lebanon's army would undergo US and UN training and vetting to ensure they are not linked to Hezbollah. And Israel would maintain a military presence in the buffer zone. And as Heidi Pett reports from Beirut, the plan is fraught with many problems.
The talks are historic. The outcome still a bit unclear. This is the 6th round of direct negotiations between Lebanon and Israel, mediated by the United States. The president here told his delegation before they took off for Rome that they should be discussing the immediate Israeli withdrawal from the pilot zones before anything else. And on Wednesday, he was making positive noises, saying that the Americans were listening to them. The Israelis, for their part, say that the pilot zones have been agreed upon and that there's a desire to implement them quickly, echoing what a US State Department official told Al Jazeera, that the talks were fruitful and that the framework agreement and the pilot zones would be implemented in coming days. Now, these pilot zones are areas where the Israeli military is supposed to withdraw. The Lebanese army then deploys and clears the area of Hezbollah weapons and fighters. But there are two problems. One, the zones currently being discussed are not really under Israeli control. Their troops are not present on the ground. Instead, they are controlling these areas from the air with fire. And secondly, that they are reportedly demanding to be directly involved in verifying afterwards that the Lebanese army really has cleared these areas. But the Lebanese army doesn't want to work directly with the Israelis. Now, that has spurred concern from many here in Lebanon. They fear that any kind of hiccup could delay the withdrawal or that it doesn't happen at all. And specifically, that concern is coming from many in the Shia community and their political parties, Hezbollah and Amal, who fear that the framework agreement may never actually be implemented, that it could take as long as 2 years, and that is why they are opposed to the agreement and the talks that led to it.
I don't know on what basis the state is working on these negotiations. They're giving the land away for free. The government doesn't care about displaced people. I don't know what to say. I've been against the negotiations from the beginning. What's taken away by force can't be reclaimed without force.
There's no such thing as pilot zones, and we don't acknowledge them. I'm from the south. Every village has a name. There's none called pilot zone. The Israelis must withdraw from all the villages in the south because it's not acceptable to have the enemy on Lebanese territory.
And there is no concrete timeline for the Israeli withdrawal. In the meantime, while Israeli military activity in southern Lebanon has slowed, it hasn't stopped. In fact, in the immediate aftermath of those talks ending in Rome, they were setting fire to houses in Kaunin, in Beit Yehun, in Barashit, firing artillery shells on the village of Hula. Heidi Pett, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Time for a short break here in Al Jazeera. When we come back, Ukraine and the EU sign a drone production deal as Kyiv ramps up attacks targeting Russia's fuel supplies. More on that. Stay with us.
Sadiq Saleh is among the thousands of subsistence farmers in central Yemen facing an existential crisis. Many months have passed without any adequate rainfall, and local water reservoirs have completely depleted. His crops have withered, and his fields are degrading into bare dust. This dam is one of the village projects that was built to collect rainwater for farmers to use during times of drought. But with no rainfall, farmers have to keep relying on the costly method of digging in more than 800 meters beneath the ground in search for what they are calling the essence of life.
Holding a powerful to account as we examine the US's role in the world on Al Jazeera.
The latest news as it breaks.
After 4 months, the school needs the building back. Families are relocating, and not all to the same place.
With in-depth reports.
Iran's leadership ceremonies are about more than war. They're also a public display of continuity after the assassination.
From the heart of the story.
The announcement made signal that Hamas was willing to step back and directly governing Gaza.
Al Jazeera and my top stories here this hour. The US military says to disable an oil tanker attempting to sail towards an Iranian port in the Gulf. US Central Command says the Curacao flag tanker was en route to Iran's Kyle Island when it was targeted for repeatedly ignoring warnings. Separately, the US military announced it's launched another series of strikes against Iran. This is the second wave of attacks in just 1 day. Iran was also serious attacks to strike. The US says Israel and Lebanon agreed on the structure and guidelines for a limited Israeli troop withdrawal from southern Lebanon. Following 2 days of talks in Rome, US officials say the so-called pilot zone process will be finalized and implemented in the coming days. Ukraine and the European Union have reached an agreement aimed at boosting drone production. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen visited Kyiv for Ukraine's State Day, where she signed the deal. It's meant to pair Europe's industrial capacity with Ukraine's knowledge of drone systems. Georgia McAlpine has the latest from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv.
It was here at the presidential palace in Kyiv that the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Against the backdrop of ongoing attacks in the southern city of Odessa, where Russia continues to target civilian shipping vessels as well as the port itself. The commissioner had a few important announcements. For starters, more money going towards Ukraine's drone production, as well as a future defense industrial partnership involving the European Union and Ukraine.
We will not only develop the next generation drones and counter-drone systems together, but we will also manufacture them faster than ever before so that Ukraine gets what it needs now. And Europe as a whole builds the capabilities it might need for tomorrow.
Von der Leyen also reaffirmed Ukraine's eventual European Union membership. In her words, saying she hoped it happened as soon as possible. But in reality, this was much of the same. The promise of future defense partnerships, more money, and the promise of future sanctions on Russia. But what it didn't answer was the more pressing question of what Ukraine will do about protecting its skies from ongoing Russian ballistic missile attacks. Audrey McAlpine, Al Jazeera, Kyiv.
Ukraine targeted more than 20 Russian ships in the Black Sea, most of them oil tankers. Since last week, Kyiv has hit more than 130 Russian vessels. Ukraine's abandoned drone attacks on Russian energy targets, including ships, refineries, and other industries. Although those repeated Ukrainian strikes on ships forced Russia to consider redirecting oil tankers from the Azov Sea, much of the attacks have taken place. Up to a quarter of Russia's wheat also passes through the sea. Repeated attacks on Russian-controlled Crimea have forced authorities there to declare an emergency. Residents are facing extensive blackouts and fuel shortages. Ukraine's also striking oil refineries deep inside Russia, and includes attacks on the Omsk refinery in Siberia, some 2,500 kilometers border, and the Urfa refinery more than 100 kilometers from the front line. Meanwhile, Russia is seeing an increase in vehicles running on alternative fuels, a way to avoid fuel shortages caused by Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries. Dmitry Medenko explains how it works from Moscow.
Have you ever seen one of these before? This is an extra fuel tank in the boot of this car, but it stores liquefied petroleum gas, or LPG. This is a bi-fuel vehicle for both petrol and LPG. This system doesn't work on diesel. So how it works is when you start the engine, it starts by burning regular petrol, and then as soon as the engine is warmed up, it starts supplying LPG into the engine, running off that. It is cleaner and it is more cost effective.
Vehicles like these rarely roll out of the factory like that. They're modified workshops like this one. On average, it costs around $2,000 to have them installed, but it pays off in the long run. LPG is half the price of petrol, and in Russia right now, demand is booming. Ukraine's attacks on oil refineries have led to fuel shortages. Long lines seen in Moscow in early July are making many people consider their options.
I installed the system 5 days ago. I didn't want to wait in line at the fuel station. It runs smoothly.
We used to modify 1 or 2 cars a day. Now we're doing 10, and there's a waiting list of around 2 weeks.
So, what's the downside? Well, engines lose some of their dynamics because of the technology, so it's not for races. Another disadvantage is less space in the boot because the extra fuel tank is fitted where the spare tire would go, so it goes back into the boot.
Finally, you need to have a network of LPG filling stations like this one, which Russia has. But if you're crossing the border, you'll probably revert back to regular petrol. The upsides, saving money, it's more eco-friendly, and perhaps the biggest drawcard, protected from fuel shortages because there aren't any lines here. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
Now, one of the world's most ancient monuments is entering a new chapter. After nearly 50 years, visitors to the Parthenon in Athens can now see its western facade free of scaffolding. Reports from Athens.
This is what people now see when they step onto the Acropolis in Athens. For the first time in half a century, the western side of the Parthenon is clear of scaffolding, and its triangular pediment is restored with new marble.
We needed to complete the western pediment. People remember its partial demolition and the brick wall that showed behind it. That wasn't how it looked originally. We needed to show the perfect triangle that is the most emblematic part of the monument. Those are the perfect proportions everyone admires when they walk onto the Acropolis.
Still to be done, a laser bleaching of these black blotches, the result of past decades of pollution. Also finished, the temple's northern colonnade, where new marble fills gaps in the original, and rising inside those columns the wall that forms the central room of the temple, which housed a gigantic gold and ivory statue of the goddess Athena.
The Parthenon has been through a lot in 2,500 years. When it was about 700 years old, a fire destroyed its wooden roof. At about 2,100 years, Venetian adventurers fired mortars at Ottoman garrison station here, igniting gunpowder magazines inside and blowing up the building. And in the early 1800s, British helped remove many of these structures, destroying parts of the Parthenon in the process.
The restoration has been painstaking. The flute on these columns is one of the hardest tasks because the columns aren't entirely straight. There's expansion in the middle and tapering at the end to create an optical illusion of strength and straightness. The ancient marble surface was refined 7 times. The most skilled modern marble sculptors say they can only refine it twice.
I wonder how they built this without the machines and the technology we have today. Every stone is shaped and placed by hand. It's astonishing. What amazes me most is the precision of the masonry. The joints between the stones are so perfectly fitted.
About another 25 years of work made. Each of these 4 pieces must be placed in its original location, and new marble molded exactly to fill any gaps. Archaeologists and workers say this is the most perfect building classical antiquity has produced. It will never be fully reconstructed, and many of the sculptures that adorned it remain in the British Museum in London. But the restoration aims to a firm foundation to imagine its splendor. Al Jazeera, Athens.
Lionel Messi's Argentina are back in the World Cup final. They beat England 2-1 in their semi-final in Atlanta. Messi set up both of his team's goals as World Cups.
Lionel Messi simply refuses to say goodbye to the World Cup stage in what is surely his final tournament, and instead keeps adding to his incredible legacy. He didn't add to the 8 goals he scored so far at this World Cup against England, but he did help to orchestrate another incredible Argentina comeback. It was his cross that enabled Lautaro Martinez to make it 2-1 and seal the victory. It means Argentina and Messi are through to their second World Cup final in a row, hoping to lift the trophy for the second time in a row. They'll take on Spain, who had beaten France in the other semi-final here at Dallas Stadium the day before. A worthy final for this World Cup. England had looked like they may be worthy finalists for a lot of this game until they scored. After that, they sat back and invited Argentina pressure, and they paid the price. Thomas Tuchel's side have received a lot of hype on their way to the semi-final. They've been brought back down to earth. It's still 60 years since they won the World Cup and counting. Argentina fans will be hoping, meanwhile, that by Sunday night, they will be counting a 4th World Cup title in their collection. Paul Rees, Al Jazeera, Dallas.
Well, that's it from me, Darren Jordan, for now. Much more, of course, on our website, aljazeera.com. There it is. The news continues after Inside Story. Stay with us.
In its exploration of how and why societies descend into genocide, Al Jazeera Untangles begins with the horrors of Darfur.
Violence that requires buy-in from the most senior leadership of a state.
Go and do what you must and don't report back.
No action from the rest of the world to meaningfully stop this violence.
Sudan, Darfur's genocide, on Al Jazeera.
Is a plan for peace between Israel and Lebanon making progress? The two sides met in Rome to discuss the next steps in their fragile agreement. Can it progress with Hezbollah opposed to the deal?
Tenho? Tem sim, cara. O que era brincadeira de criança virou vocação.
Essa é a estrela da turma.
Quem tem estrela tá na Cruzeiro do Sul.
More than 1 million. It's occupying 600 square kilometers in southern Lebanon. That's about 6% of the country. The talks in Rome are meant to advance the June agreement, with Lebanon insisting Israeli troops withdraw and Israel insisting Hezbollah lay down its weapons. But is the Lebanese army capable of asserting control? And can renewed fighting be averted? We'll talk to our guests in a moment, but first, this report from Fadia Carr.
For the sixth round of US-backed talks, Israeli and Lebanese delegations have met in Rome. They're discussing how to implement the next phase of their framework agreement. At the center of the discussions is two so-called pilot zones in southern Lebanon. One is the town of Froun, south of the Litani River. It's not under Israeli occupation. The second is Zoutar al-Gharbia, where Israeli forces maintain control through sustained fire, preventing people from returning home. Israeli forces are meant to gradually pull out from these two areas, with Lebanon's military moving in to take control. That is meant to pave the way for a larger Israeli withdrawal.
We are ready to move forward implementing these two pilot zones. I hope and tend to believe that this round of discussions in Rome will promote it.
President Joseph Aoun has demanded Israel leave the pilot zones before the broader implementation of the agreement is discussed. But Israel says Hezbollah must disarm before any withdrawal takes place. Hezbollah has rejected the framework, insisting it will not lay down its weapons.
We will not be dragged into internal strife, but we will not allow anyone to attack or undermine us. Our voice will be loud, and our positions will be decisive in defense of Lebanon's sovereignty and human rights.
There is skepticism in Lebanon about Israel's intention to pull back its forces. Speaker of Parliament Nabih Berri has called the concept of pilot zones a trap and says it could be years before Israeli troops leave. And despite ceasefire agreements with the Lebanese government, Israel has continued its offensive and occupation in the south. More than 4,000 people have been killed and more than 1 million displaced since March. US mediators have envisaged the pilot zones as a confidence-building measure, but they have been another point of contention in an agreement no side seems willing to advance. Fadia Carr, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, to discuss this further, let's bring our guests into the show. We have joining us from Sydney in Australia, Ali Rizk. He's a security affairs analyst who specializes in US foreign policy and counterterrorism. Adolfo Franco is in Washington, D.C. He's a Republican strategist and foreign policy analyst. And in London, we have Yossi Meckelberg, a senior consulting fellow at Chatham House. A warm welcome to you all. If I could start with Adolfo in Washington, D.C. So what's your reading of this Rome meeting? Has it achieved any progress on the key point of scheduling an Israeli withdrawal from occupied Lebanese territory?
Well, first, thank you for the invitation. Overall, I think it's remarkable progress where we are. Who would have thought this just a few months ago? These are the first high-level contacts and even the treaty and the discussions in Washington we've had with Lebanon and Israel have had in 40 years, I believe, or at least decades. So it's remarkable where we are. Obviously, the situation is complicated and difficult. It's really two things that are going on here. One is who goes first, what happens first. Difficult to imagine things simultaneously happening. What I mean by that is the disarmament of Hezbollah, which of course Hezbollah is not going to voluntarily do, so it has to be done forcefully. And then secondly, the Israeli withdrawal. From the standpoint of Israel, they're not going to withdraw from territory if Hezbollah continues to be armed. So let's take that one first, just very quickly. That, of course, can't be done without the assistance of Lebanese army, which is willfully currently incapable of doing so. So that will require a lot of effort by the United States and Israel to have that happen. I don't think that will be an easy task, but that's going to be a condition since they have absolutely no intention of disarming. But the idea of Israel withdrawing before that happens is just too risky for Israel. There's no indication by Hezbollah that it's willing to do this. And just a simple withdrawal from Israel is not going to have Hezbollah disappear. Keeping in mind their 1982 charter calls for the elimination of the state of Israel. They're not renouncing that. And of course, they're an Iranian proxy, and Iran is now, we haven't even discussed probably the complications with the US-Iran deal that supposedly obviously involves Lebanon and is supposedly going to end the conflict. So it's a long way of saying it's complicated, but here's the good news. The partnership between Lebanon and Israel with U.S. support, if sufficient resources are brought to bear brought to bear to help the Lebanese army, we can once and for all rid of this cancer. It's not going to be a voluntary action by Hezbollah. It will only be done militarily, and that's only when Lebanon is in a position to be able to accomplish that. Then I think Israel would happily withdraw.
All right, Adolfo there, Ali, saying it's complicated. Is part of the complication that the agreement itself, the June 26th agreement, set up a complicated set of dynamics or sequence of dynamics, with Clause 5 referring to the disarmament and dismantlement of all armed groups in Lebanon, and then saying, quote, sort of after that, it would eliminate, the disarming of those groups would, quote, eliminate any future need for IDF, the Israeli military force, to action or presence in Lebanon. So it kind of, rather than requiring the occupation to end and then armed groups fighting that occupation to also end, it flips the equation round and requires the armed groups fighting an occupation to end first. Very complicated?
Indeed, it's an upside-down logic. It's a warped logic. Allow me to address some of the points which were mentioned by my colleague, the previous speaker, referring to the 1982 charter that Hezbollah is committed to Israel's destruction. That may be so in 1982, yes, but Hezbollah has changed since then. And if you notice that the recent speeches which we've been hearing from Hezbollah, it's more about defending Lebanon more than anything else. And we have to remember that, yes, Hezbollah does have a history of employing anti-Israeli rhetoric, but it's Israel that has basically always been the aggressor. 90% of the time it's been the aggressor against Lebanon. Now, in some of the cases where some might say that Hezbollah started, okay, let's assume so, for example, in 2006 when Hezbollah took captive some Israeli soldiers. Later on, we saw also Hezbollah launching missiles after the assassination of the former Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. But the Israeli response in all of those cases was totally disproportionate. So to give this impression that Israel is somehow innocent and is a dove of peace and that Hezbollah is the aggressor, I think that rather distorts reality. And Hezbollah does have a history, basically, in thwarting Israeli occupation, in standing up to Israeli occupation. And many people, a large segment of the Lebanese population, does see Hezbollah as a legitimate resistance force, not as an Iranian proxy, like my colleague just mentioned. And for this reason, I think that any attempts to forcefully disarm Hezbollah are going to lead to a very messy situation in Lebanon. And this is something which Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri has alluded to on more than one occasion. Now, in my personal humble opinion, that's actually what Israel wants. It wants that messy situation in Lebanon. It wants infighting in Lebanon.
Okay, Ali,
that
that is an important point you're raising, Ali, but I'm going to ask you to hold that thought for a minute before we go there. I want to bring Yossi into the discussion. And again, trying to focus now on what's happening now and in Rome. Have we seen any progress on achieving some of those things that the June 26th agreement called for? Things like a coordination group, forming that security annex, those sorts of mechanisms which are necessary to try and implement this agreement. Did those talks go anywhere?
I think the most positive things that we've seen so far is actually there are talks. Because we see, for instance, the case of the US and Iran, what happens when there is breakdown in talks. So at least there are talks. Do we see great progress? No. I think the sequencing is problematic, but unfortunately necessary in all such negotiations. You start this negotiation with no trust whatsoever between the sides. Even if they agree, it's not between Israel and Lebanon, because that has been between Israel and the Lebanese government. This agreement could be implemented rather quickly. But there is another player here, which is the Hezbollah. And when you talk about the Hezbollah, you also involve Iran in this. And as a result, what happened in between the US and Iran. So that makes it, very, very, very complicated. And I think the most important thing is to refrain with the rhetoric and the demands for absolute, but incremental steps forward, whether it's the pilot zones. See that the Hezbollah is withdrawing beyond the Litani River. Israel is gradually withdrawing to the border, making sure at the end of the day, the disarmament of Hezbollah is first and foremost a Lebanese issue, because it's not a normal situation. It's completely abnormal to have a militia within a country. If there is a resistance to occupation, it's by the government, and we can include Hezbollah or elements from the Shia community. So I think in this sense, it's also important is that the United States plays a proactive, and not only the United States, other elements in the international community, including within the region, play an active role in advancing progress gradually, step by step, that both sides will feel that they're not completely losing their relevance or their security.
On that point, Adolfo, when we talk about what Yossi was mentioning there, step by step, and you mentioned earlier that in your perspective, Hezbollah will have to be forced to disarm. Who's going to force it? Can the Lebanese army do that? Does it have the capability? Does it have the political, does the leadership in Lebanon have the political will to do that?
Well, I'll answer your question, and then I'd like to comment a little bit on what the guest said, if I may. First, it does not have the capability now. If not, that would have taken place, in my opinion. And that has been a consequence in the past, unfortunately, of some Israeli pressure to keep arms sales to Lebanon capped. But hopefully that is now, according to Secretary Rubio, off the table, and there will be a concerted effort to give the Lebanese army over a period of time the resources. Not only
was the agreement agreeing to something then that, in your perspective and what you've just said, is not feasible?
Well, it's not feasible currently. This is not going to be resolved overnight. The Lebanese army ultimately needs to disarm Hezbollah, which is what the goal of this whole exercise ultimately really is, not only to take over the pilot zones. Remember, the pilot zones are designed to be taken over by the Lebanese army and keep Hezbollah in check. But as your previous guest said, this is state within a state. It's a terrorist organization. Now, where I disagree with the Sydney guess is the following. It's a little bit on the eye of the beholder. I see Hezbollah as an Iranian proxy and in a complete terrorist organization. I don't view Israel as such. There was no mention of all the attacks that Hezbollah has done in northern Israel, how many people have been displaced in Israel. And now you might say that's because they're occupied. But here's the fact. Most Lebanese, if you saw a Gallup poll from this week, the vast majority want Hezbollah disarmed and Iran out of Lebanese affairs. So this is what the Lebanese people and the Lebanese government really want. Obviously, over a period of many decades, this radical Muslim sect has done everything, particularly against the Christians, to not only change the demographics of the country, but to ultimately make it an Islamic state. That's the end goal here.
Sorry, Adolfo, how have they tried to change the demographics?
But you have to understand, that is at the root of this problem. The root of this problem is a radical, if you believe Hezbollah's militia and armed are a legitimate organization and so forth, then we just don't have a lot to discuss, frankly, because I don't see it that way.
Do you have any evidence for that statement that they're trying to change the demographics of Lebanon?
Well, if you see the number of Christians who have left the country, if you see how the country has changed over a period of time, if in my opinion, if Hezbollah and the radicals, Islamists have their way, everyone would be expelled from Lebanon that's not a Muslim, ultimately. That's my opinion. I don't see a lot of tolerance in Iran. I don't see a lot of tolerance from Hezbollah and Hamas. So if you believe, as I do, and our government does, that these are terrorist organizations promoting an ideology, they have to be rooted out. And this is what the idea here is, and have the Lebanese government, and let's not talk about the Hezbollah party. I'm talking about the Hezbollah militia. No country would tolerate that. The other guest said it. And the guest from Sydney said disproportionate. If missiles were being launched in the United States from Mexico, I can assure you the U.S. response would be greater than what the Israeli response has been. So it's a convenient thing to say if your population is not under attack. This is a terrorist cell, and the Lebanese see it as such.
Okay, I'm going to bring Ali back into the discussion. I'm sure you have a few things that you want to pick up there on. If you could also focus on the question of, if Lebanon goes down that route that Adolfo is advocating, does that mean a civil war in Lebanon?
Yes, actually, several points, as you can imagine. First of all, this talk about Hezbollah being a radical Muslim organization that basically wants a Christian exodus, that's completely factually incorrect. Now, I might be in Sydney now, but I'm Lebanese and I spend most of my time in Lebanon, and I know the situation in Lebanon very well, and I know Hezbollah's approach very well at the same time. If anything, many Christians, or a significant portion of Christians, see Hezbollah as a force for good, as a protector. And I'll refer you to what happened in Syria. There were several cases in Syria where Hezbollah actually protected Christians when Hezbollah was involved there back during the Syrian war. So Hezbollah is actually seen by a large segment of Lebanese, including Christians, as being a moderate player. Now, previously in the 80s,
Ali, we also have to remember the role of Hezbollah. There's a lot of question marks on that in the Syrian war. There was a lot of UN reports about how oppressive the Bashar al-Assad regime was, just to put that into perspective. So, yeah, I'll let you continue, finish the thought.
O trabalho pode ficar extremamente complicado, a não ser que você use a Monday.com, uma plataforma de gestão de trabalho que permite visualizar todo o trabalho da sua equipe em uma só tela. Assim, a comunicação fica organizada em um só lugar e, em poucos cliques, é possível obter uma visão geral de todos os aspectos do seu negócio, porque quando tudo está alinhado, nada atrapalha seu caminho. Acesse Monday.com e comece seu teste grátis hoje mesmo.
But the issue here is because you have an abnormal neighbor, which is Israel. there is no other entity in the world, some might call it country, which has territorial ambitions and aspires to take other people's lands like Israel. So I think it's only natural. Now, the reason why Hezbollah is doing that, why it's resisting, is because basically there's a veto that the Lebanese army cannot possess weapons which would enable the army to have a match or to stand up to Israel. And so the only logical option which is left is for there to be Hezbollah. And this is something which is normal. When you're faced with a superior conventional military, you resort to asymmetric warfare. That's the A's and B's.
All right.
About this.
Sorry, Ali, I will come back to you, but just to keep things moving, I can see Adolfo shaking his head there. And Adolfo, I wanted basically to put to you the point which I think Ali is making. Does the same standard apply to Israel when you use terms such as extremist, radical, terrorist, and so on? We're talking about a country, in the case of Israel, which a UN Commission of Inquiry in September last year found guilty of committing a genocide, something that's been echoed in the reports of Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch of December last year too. Would you reserve the same condemnation for a state that is being accused and found of genocide?
I don't believe it's committed genocide.
So they're all wrong, sir, including Physicians for Human Rights Israel and B'Tselem, Israeli human rights groups? They're all wrong?
Well, may I respond, or do you want to respond for me?
No, go ahead. I was just giving you the facts.
I'm giving you the facts.
Can check them. I didn't make anything up.
Okay, why don't you do this? Why don't you answer my questions and move on to the other guest?
No, I would suggest if you could answer my question and the facts which I've raised.
I would suggest that you...
No, I'm giving you the opportunity. Unless you take it.
No, I gave you an answer and you rudely interrupted.
No, I've interrupted all the guests, sir, with follow-ups where relevant. All right, we'll move on to Yossi and give you a chance to gather your thoughts then.
I don't have to gather my thoughts.
Lebanon might be heading into some kind of internal conflict. Would that be in Israel's interests?
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes is to try to look at it in zero-sum game, in binary way. There is one side it's right, one side it's wrong. There are sides that are badly behaved. And I think, yes, I think it's an abnormal situation of Hezbollah being in military or within a military. At the same time, Israel responds to this by erasing villages in South Lebanon and killing 4,000 people, displacing 1 million, is not the answer, because Israel is using only one tool in the toolbox, is using military force. So in this sense, the negotiation in Rome should be very much welcome, but they should also see a result. The last thing that Israel needs to see is another civil war in Lebanon, exactly the opposite. It should help the Lebanese government, to empower the Lebanese government by showing goodwill to withdraw without risking its security. I think facts should be put on the table. At the end of the day, it was Hezbollah that on the 8th of October 2023 decided to attack Israel. A day after Hamas attacked Israel, it decided to join Iran. So I don't think Hezbollah serves interest. At the end of the day, it doesn't serve Israel's interest by insisting of occupying parts of Lebanon, as it behaves badly, very badly, in Gaza or in the West Bank, because this is also a very extreme government that doesn't see most of the time the value of diplomacy. And that's why I said earlier, we need international community which is proactive and day in, day out is involved and ensure that it highlights bad behavior and makes sure that there are consequences to this kind of behavior on each side, until there is a point that the border between Lebanon and Israel is the agreed international border. Israel is not attacked from Lebanon, and Israel is not either attacking Lebanon or occupying any part of Lebanon. A civil war in Lebanon is the opposite of what Israel needs right now.
There's also a question, though, whether Israeli leaders are committed to fully withdrawing from Lebanon when you hear what Israel's defense minister had to say on June the 24th. Let's listen in.
דרישה, ובכל מקרה לא נספוג, אבל אין דרישה. גם תהיה דרישה. אני להקפיד לצבא המלחמה, צה"ל, אנחנו שם כדי להגן על תושבי הצפון.
All right, so with that in mind, Ali Rizk, do you see that the Israeli plan is to simply withdraw from some of these pilot zones, but not to withdraw fully from all Lebanese territory when we hear statements like that from Israel Katz?
I think so, yes. I think that the Israelis don't have the intention to fully withdraw, but there's been an interesting development now. What Axios recently reported, where US President Donald Trump told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that you should redeploy your troops from both Lebanon and Syria. Now, that's a very, very interesting statement, and it comes after Trump met with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and also with the Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara. So I think it would be safe to assume, in my opinion, that the Turkish president is playing a role here, telling Trump that it's in American interests for you to put pressure on Netanyahu. Now, if Turkey indeed is upscaling its role when it comes to both Lebanon and Syria, that's going to be a major, major development, and that, I think, could lead, and I think it is leading Trump to exert more pressure on Netanyahu. Now, will that succeed? We have to wait and see, but the fact that Turkey now appears to be assuming a more high-profile role, I think that could be an important factor that determines the future course of events. Just quickly about the issue of the Lebanese civil war. Now, I'm not sure if that would serve Israeli interests or not, but I do think that that's what the Israelis want, because basically, when you have a civil war, that leads to a failed state. And when you have a failed state, I think that Israel can use that as an excuse in order to further expand territorially. So what happened in Syria, for example, after the downfall of Bashar al-Assad, they took advantage of that under various excuses to seize Syrian territory. And if that happens in Lebanon, where we have a failed state as a result of civil war, I think they're going to also use that as an excuse to take more Lebanese territories. So I do think that civil war is part of the Israeli agenda, and that was even said, by the way, by Aaron Ben David, who is a famous Israeli military commentator. He said that this has been the Israeli objective all along, to ignite a civil war in Lebanon, and that would also have the added goal or the added value of weakening or eliminating Hezbollah, because Hezbollah would then be forced to fight an enemy or to go into a confrontation from within.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. So let's thank our guests, Ali Rizk, Adolfo Franco, and Yossi Meckelberg. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, Sami Zaidan, and the whole team here. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in a moment, so stay with us.
Examining the impact of today's headlines, setting the agenda for tomorrow's discussions. International filmmakers and world-class journalists bring programs to inspire you on Al Jazeera.
As Mexico co-hosts the World Cup, a lawyer and mother determined to protect her daughter from gender violence takes her fight to the pitch. Creating a football team and a safe space for young people.
Valores como la inclusión, el respeto.
Mexico, football without fear. A witness documentary on Al Jazeera.
Reminders of an ancient past are everywhere in the city of Tyre, tracing back origins to before Roman and Phoenician times, when it was a vibrant crossroads between competing cultures. Now, Israeli airstrikes of this modern-day conflict have added additional scars.
Attacks on this centuries-old market and other historic sites throughout southern Lebanon are defended by Israel that claims it's acting out of military necessity.
Overseeing the cleanup of this market, Nabatia's mayor is still waiting to be told what military value this site held.
This is the oldest market in Nabatea. It is part of our heritage.
What people here need now, shopkeeper Hussein tells us, is a period of calm to rebuild and recover. But the sheer scale of Israel's strikes means some of Lebanese heritage is likely gone forever.
Hello, I'm Darren Jordan. This is Al Jazeera, live from Doha. The top stories this hour. US President Donald Trump says Iran has released an American citizen from detention as a gesture of goodwill. Both Washington and Iran exchanged fire for yet another day over the Strait of Hormuz. The US military strikes southern Iran and Gulf countries have come under fire from Iran. The US says Israel and Lebanon are moving towards an Israeli troop withdrawal from pilot zones in southern Lebanon. Plus,
Donald Trump's war with Iran is back on. There's a new American blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. The president is threatening to hit power plants and bridges. The global economy is holding its breath. That's later on This Is America.
and in sport, Lionel Messi inspires Argentina to victory as they beat England to reach the World Cup final. US President Donald Trump says Iran has released an American citizen in what he's labeled a gesture of goodwill. On social media, Trump said Iran has allowed an American citizen who was wrongfully detained in December of 2024 under the presidency of sleepy Joe Biden to leave the country. She's now safely outside of Iran and in good condition. The United States of America appreciates this gesture of goodwill by Iran. Trump didn't reveal any other details. Iran hasn't yet commented. Well, earlier, the US military said it disabled an oil tanker attempting to sail towards an Iranian port in the Strait of Hormuz. US Central Command said the Curacao-flagged tanker was on its way to Karg Island when it was targeted with missiles. CENTCOM accused the commercial vessel of ignoring multiple warnings while trying to violate the US blockade. Well, the US military has also carried out another wave of strikes on southern Iran. Iranian state media report explosions have been heard near the port cities of Bandar Abbas and Sirik. CENTCOM says the attacks are aimed at limiting Iran's ability to attack commercial shipping in the strait. Iran's health ministry says at least 35 people have been killed since the start of the recent escalation over the key waterway. Well, President Trump says Iran will soon be defeated. He's also downplayed the conflict's impact on global energy markets after a surge in oil prices.
The country is booming, and we'll have Iran defeated soon. They'll be defeated very soon. And then I guess it'll be even better. But you know, even during this, it's been amazing. I mean, to think. So I call it a military operation, but I call it whatever you want. It's incredible. It hasn't made a dent. A lot of people thought oil would go up to $350 a barrel, and today it's at $79. A couple of days ago, it was at 68. It went up a little bit because I had to take tough action because they did not obey what they're supposed to obey. I mean, they just didn't do it. So we took a little action.
Well, the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman says that Tehran will commit to the ceasefire agreement as long as Washington also abides by it.
From the very beginning, we have said commitment in return for commitment. What does that mean? That means we will fulfill our commitments if other party is committing to them. The other party violated them, and in return, we refrain from implementing our commitments wherever necessary. This is our principle, and we will continue on the same path.
Well, we're live in Tehran and Washington, D.C. Let's begin there with Mike Hanna. Mike, so Donald Trump just announced that Iran has released a U.S. citizen. What more do we know at this stage, Mike?
Well, yes, he released this news on Truth Social just over an hour ago. He says that she was detained unjustly in 2023 during the Biden presidency, and in a rare move, he's expressed gratitude to the Iranian authorities for releasing this person. Her exact identity is not known at the moment, but certainly a good sense of gratitude being expressed by President Trump, very rare indeed in this time of heightened conflict between Iran and the U.S.
Meanwhile, Mike, the U.S. has launched a third wave of strikes over the past 24 hours. What are you hearing from the U.S. military there?
This has now become a daily occurrence over the past 4 to 5 days. The U.S. military conducting strikes on targets it says are part of Iran's attempts to hold on control of the Strait of Hormuz. They also diverted a vessel which was heading to an Iranian port. This is believed to be the third vessel which has been boarded or diverted since the U.S. blockade of the Strait of Hormuz began to prevent Iran's vessels or vessels linked to Iran from getting to or getting out of Iranian port facilities. But clearly CENTCOM, Central Command, is intent on carrying out these ongoing attacks. President Trump himself has said that these could last for days. On the other hand, he's still expressing the possibility of dialogue going on, of negotiations happening again. So on the one hand, President Trump threatening ongoing attacks. On the other hand, still opening up the possibility that there may be an avenue or a path open to dialogue, if not negotiation.
All right, Al Jazeera's Mike Hanna there, live for us in Washington. Mike, thank you. Let's bring in Tahid Asadi. He joins us live now from Tehran. Tahid, so what are you hearing there about how intense these American strikes are?
Well, Iranian southern coastal cities have been coming under attack for yet another night, in which we have been witnessing in Qeshm Island, for instance, the largest island in the vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz, sounds of explosion reported also in other cities such as Bandar Abbas, the largest and perhaps the most important port city of the country. We've got blasts taking place as a result of the...
Acabei de criar aplicativo de orçamento com base 44. Interessante. Ele consegue gerar relatórios. Agora consegue. Mais alguma coisa? A sincronização pode processar faturas? Pode mostrar o crescimento de custos por categoria. Proteção por senha. Pode rastrear tendências de gastos? Pronto. Legal.
Iranians are talking about their retaliatory strike. Most recently, we've got the spokesperson for the IRGC on their X account coming out to say that, quote-unquote, Iran's military operations are currently focused on destroying U.S. offensive infrastructure in the region, and he continued to say that the next step will begin, indicative of a potential escalation on the horizon. And that's something that we have been hearing from the Iranians, that should American strikes continue, they are going to strike back, each time stronger with more crushing responses.
And Tahid, earlier today, CENTCOM announced it struck Iranian targets on Greater Tunb Island. Tell us more about the significance of this island.
Very much significant from several perspectives. First, these are three important islands, Greater Tunb as well as the Lesser Tunb and Bu Musa, and they have been witnessing explosions over the past nights. And it is important seeing that Iran is trying to flex their muscles when it comes to their quote-unquote sovereign right over these islands. And of course, it's also important geostrategically, seeing that Iran tries to implement a new level of control and authority over the Strait of Hormuz. and the control over those islands, and including Qishm Island, as I mentioned earlier, is a key point of concern for Iranians in that regard. We also know that geographically and also militarily speaking, they are important because they are considered as sort of forward military outposts, sort of, I would say, part of a layered defense system that Iran is trying to practice at the situation of the Strait of Hormuz. And let's just keep in mind, Iran is talking about maintenance of control and authority, a new regime of control and authority over the Strait of Hormuz, seeing it as a leverage in this intricate situation, as a bargaining chip when it came to the negotiations. And now with more confrontational scenarios on the horizon, it becomes even more important.
Right, Tawhid Asadi, live for us there in the Iranian capital. Tawhid, thank you. Well, Iran has renewed its strikes on Gulf states in the past few hours. The Kuwaiti military says its air defense systems are responding to hostile drone threats, while in Bahrain, the Interior Ministry says air raid sirens are sounding there. Zain Basravi has more on Iran's retaliatory strikes across the region from Doha.
As the U.S. continued to carry out strikes on Iran, Iran continued on Wednesday and into early Thursday morning to carry out retaliatory strikes in neighboring Gulf Arab states, hosting thousands of U.S. military personnel. Iran saying that those attacks were valid because it was targeting U.S. assets. Gulf Arab states condemning Iran for these retaliatory attacks that they describe as a violation of international law. Kuwait, Jordan, Bahrain coming under attack on Wednesday. Kuwait saying that it took on 4 cruise missiles and 21 drones from Iran on Wednesday. And late Wednesday into early Thursday morning, Kuwait and Bahrain both saying that they were continuing to confront hostile projectiles coming towards them from Iran, air raid sirens and warnings going off in those countries. This is making the task of mediators much more difficult. As long as the U.S. continues to carry out strikes on Iran, and as long as Iran continues to retaliate on U.S. assets in neighboring Arab countries, the work of mediators becomes more and more difficult. Trying to get them back to a place of dialogue becomes more and more strenuous. One positive sign is that the foreign minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, did visit Wednesday Qatar. He did come to Doha to pay his respects, to give condolences for the death of the father emir, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani. He came at the tail end of the mourning period, but simply visiting is a significant sign that diplomatic connections remain, that there still remains some room for Qatar and Iran to speak. But it does come at a time that Iran continues to carry strikes out on other GCC countries, which does beg the question, will diplomacy work, or will the hawks that seem to be in control of this conflict right now in Washington, hawks in Tehran, who seem to be leading the charge at the moment, escalating this conflict, will they win out in the medium to long term? Will this conflict carry on? Those questions remain open. Zain Basravi, Al Jazeera, Doha.
Now, the U.S. says Israel and Lebanon have agreed on the structure and guidelines for a limited Israeli troop withdrawal from southern Lebanon. It follows 2 days of talks in Rome. U.S. officials say the withdrawal process will be finalized and implemented in the coming days. The Memorandum of Understanding signed between Washington and Tehran in June agreed to end fighting on all fronts, including in Lebanon. Well, under the U.S.-brokered framework deal signed at the end of June, the agreement stated Israeli troops would hand over control of some territory in southern Lebanon to Lebanese forces. Lebanon's army would undergo US and UN training and vetting to ensure they are not linked to Hezbollah. And Israel would maintain a military presence in the buffer zone. And as Heidi Pett reports from Beirut, the plan is fraught with many problems.
The talks are historic. The outcome still a bit unclear. This is the 6th round of direct negotiations between Lebanon and Israel, mediated by the United States. The president here told his delegation before they took off for Rome that they should be discussing the immediate Israeli withdrawal from the pilot zones before anything else. And on Wednesday, he was making positive noises, saying that the Americans were listening to them. The Israelis, for their part, say that the pilot zones have been agreed upon and that there's a desire to implement them quickly. echoing what a US State Department official told Al Jazeera, that the talks were fruitful and that the framework agreement and the pilot zones would be implemented in coming days. Now, these pilot zones are areas where the Israeli military is supposed to withdraw. The Lebanese army then deploys and clears the area of Hezbollah weapons and fighters. But there are two problems. One, the zones currently being discussed are not really under Israeli control. Their troops are not present on the ground. Instead, they're controlling these areas from the air with fire. And secondly, that they are reportedly demanding to be directly involved in verifying afterwards that the Lebanese army really has cleared these areas. But the Lebanese army doesn't want to work directly with the Israelis. Now, that has spurred concern from many here in Lebanon. They fear that any kind of hiccup could delay the withdrawal or that it doesn't happen at all. And specifically, that concern is coming from many in the Shia community and their political parties, Hezbollah and Amal, who fear that the framework agreement may never actually be implemented, that it could take as long as 2 years, and that is why they are opposed to the agreement and the talks that led to it.
I don't know on what basis the state is working on these negotiations. They're giving the land away for free. The government doesn't care about displaced people. I don't know what to say. I've been against the negotiations from the beginning. What's taken away by force can't be reclaimed without force.
There's no such thing as pilot zones, and we don't acknowledge them. I'm from the south. Every village has a name. There's none called pilot zone. The Israelis must withdraw from all the villages in the south because it's not acceptable to have the enemy on Lebanese territory.
And there is no concrete timeline for the Israeli withdrawal. In the meantime, while Israeli military activity in southern Lebanon has slowed, it hasn't stopped. In fact, in the immediate aftermath of those talks ending in Rome, they were setting fire to houses in Kaunin, in Beit Yehun, in Barashit, firing artillery shells on the village of Hula. Heidi Pett, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Israeli airstrikes have hit central Gaza. A residential home was targeted in the Al Maghazi area. Separately, 2 people were injured after a residential building came under attack in central Gaza's largest city, Deir al-Balah. Israeli forces issued at least 4 forced displacement parts of central Gaza in just 2 hours. Israel's continued to attack Gaza despite a US-brokered ceasefire agreed between Israel and Hamas back in October. 12 Palestinian prisoners have been reunited with their families in Gaza after they were released by Israel. The International Committee of the Red Cross helped to facilitate the transfer. They travelled through the Kerem Abu Salem border crossing before being taken to the Al-Aqsa hospital. Mirth Al-Khalout reports from central Gaza.
The ICRC just facilitated the arrival of 12 Palestinian prisoners who were released by the Israeli authorities and arrived here to Al-Aqsa hospital in central Gaza. Behind me, what you are seeing here behind me is Palestinian prisoners who were just released by the Israeli jails. According to the officials, there are more than 9,000 Palestinians in the Israeli jails at the moment. At the other side here, there are families who are waiting for any piece of information, or they are expecting the arrival of their beloved ones who are in jail right now. So today, some families will go home or return home with the beloved ones who were just released, while others will return with piece of information, while many others will return home empty-handed. So this is the overall situation here in Al-Aqsa hospital. As you can clearly see here, the horizon and the atmosphere is filled with joy and happiness, and also with anticipation as 12 Palestinians just arrived, and also a lot of families are just waiting for their beloved ones to arrive from the Israeli jails. Muad Al-Khalout, Al Jazeera, from central Gaza, Palestine.
The Israeli government's approved a $2.3 billion plan to expand the legal settlements across the occupied West Bank. Separately, the construction of 12,000 new housing units has also been approved. Several Western nations have warned that this is a violation of international law. Al Jazeera's Noor O'Day reports from the occupied West Bank.
The Israeli government just announced that it's building the 104th new illegal settlement in the occupied West Bank. Let's put that in perspective. active. Since 1967, when the occupation began, successive Israeli governments built nearly 220 illegal settlements like the one behind me. Now, the new settlement will be built in Sanur in Jenin in the northern occupied West Bank, where there are fewer illegal settlements. Israeli settlers have already installed caravans there. Now they will benefit from the nearly $3 billion allocated by their government for infrastructure projects to strengthen Israeli settlement, especially in the northern West Bank. Government ministers are celebrating, calling these measures a settlement revolution that entrenches Israeli control over the occupied West Bank. Israeli settlers are making the best of this political climate and support. Like this attack south of Hebron, an Israeli settler who took over Palestinian land in the Hebron Hills attacked 79-year-old Ibrahim Jbour and his family. Then the Israeli army detained Ibrahim. And this settler campaign has now reached major Palestinian cities. About 24 hours ago, Israeli settlers came with occupation soldiers and installed these cement blocks. They've effectively blocked off the entire hill on the edge of Ramallah city from its Palestinian owners. Now, this newly installed gate is also in front of this Palestinian home, and the owners fear that they now have to contend with Israeli settlers, the occupation soldiers, and all the harassment that comes with their presence. Israeli ministers are very clear on their end goal: kill the idea of a Palestinian state. For ordinary Palestinians, this takeover agenda is making their daily life on their land increasingly untenable. Noor Audi, Al Jazeera, Ramallah, Palestine.
Ukrainian officials say Kyiv is under attack from Russian ballistic missiles. At least one missile is reported to have hit the city. Ukraine's Air Force says more missiles are approaching the capital. The attacks come just hours after European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen visited Kyiv to boost defense ties. And Ukraine targeted more than 20 Russian ships in the Black Sea. Most of them are oil tankers. Since last week, Kyiv has hit more than 130 Russian vessels. Ukraine has expanded drone attacks on Russian energy targets, including ships, refineries, and other industries. France's parliament has approved a bill to allow assisted dying after years of debate. The legislation establishes a framework for medically assisted suicide for adults with incurable illnesses. If approved, patients will be able to self-administer the medication. And in cases where they aren't physically able to do so, a doctor.
And maybe through Lautaro Martinez, they're going out in the semi-final stage. It's been
challenge until a long-range strike from Enzo Fernandez made it 1-1. Then in
Try not to cry because I already did plenty of that in the dressing room. It's incredible. Everything we've achieved is incredible.
Kind of 60 minutes, we scored, we deserved to be ahead. And then for one reason or another, we struggled to keep the ball, we struggled to put pressure on the ball, and it just allowed them to create more momentum. It created more attacks for them in our final third.
Our World Cup correspondent Paul Rees is pushed to win back-to-back World Cups.
Lionel Messi simply refuses to say goodbye to the World Cup stage in what is surely his final tournament, and instead keeps adding to his incredible legacy. He didn't add to the 8 goals he scored so far at this World Cup against England, but he did help to orchestrate another incredible Argentina comeback. It was his cross that enabled Lautaro Martinez to make it 2-1 and seal the victory. It means Argentina and Messi are through to their second World Cup final in a row, hoping to lift the trophy for the second time in a row. They'll take on Spain, who had beaten France in the other semi-final here at Dallas Stadium the day before. A worthy final for this World Cup. England had looked like they may be worthy finalists for a lot of this game until they scored. After that, they sat back and invited Argentina pressure, and they paid the price. Thomas Tuchel's side have received a lot of hype on their way to the semi-final. They've been brought back down to earth. It's still 60 years since they won the World Cup and counting. Argentina fans will be hoping, meanwhile, that by Sunday night, they will be counting a 4th World Cup title in their collection. Paul Rees, Al Jazeera, Dallas.
Well, some of Argentina players could be in trouble with FIFA. They displayed a banner which translates as the Falklands are Argentine. While the two countries went to war over the Falklands in 1982, the islands have been a British overseas territory for nearly 200 years. FIFA forbids anyone from displaying political banners inside match venues. Now, these were the scenes back in Buenos Aires as celebrations erupted across the country. Argentina have now extended their unbeaten World Cup run to 13 matches. 39-year-old Messi is in sight of an achievement that was beyond even Diego Maradona, namely a second World Cup title. Well, no such luck for England fans. Their long wait for World Cup final appearance goes on. It's 60 years and counting since their country last made it to the international football's biggest game.
The reality is that England just weren't good enough. And it's kind of the same old story. I've seen this for many years, and I try not to get too high, too low, trying to find that balance.
Disappointed, but they've given it a good go. We've had a good World Cup, I think, this year round, but there's always next time.
Absolutely gutted. What can I say? It was really disappointing, of course. Argentina just did us again. It's historical that Argentina always seems to overcome us. Really disappointing.
As soon as we scored that first goal, it was just defense, pushing back. Why the heck was everyone just in one line?
I would have never have thought, even if we lost, I didn't think you'd lose this way. Maybe penalties, maybe just an unstoppable goal. But to basically give up, go defensive and think, yeah, let's just hold on to what we got. Come on, that's no way to lose in a semi-final of a World Cup.
Well, as the World Cup draws to a close, most of the visiting fans have already headed home. Let's hear now from one U.S. football commentator as he reflects on what it was like for his country to host the tournament for a second time.
These are from all the different cities in the United States. The rest of the world still thinks we don't know anything about soccer and that they've got to teach us everything. And I'm hoping that now that they've been here for a while, that misconception's been changed a little bit. 94 was kind of the introduction of soccer to America. We had commentators who had to do crash courses on soccer to be able to call the games. Now there's an established league here with 30 teams in it, academy systems. I'm a commentator myself now, and I feel like I have the chops to talk about the game with anybody around the world. The thing that's so beautiful about the game is it's played all over the world in every circumstance you can imagine. Curacao, one of the most beautiful moments I was in the building for when their keeper made 15 saves and they got a result. And the arrogance to say who deserves a seat at the table and who doesn't. Who are we to say they shouldn't be a part of it, or it should only be the way we envision it? These are the two probably greatest athletes in Kansas City history until Patrick Mahomes came around. George Brett, who's one of the probably 30 best baseball players of all time, but that's Tom Watson. It seemed to me, as a person who grew up in the middle of the country that has to traverse an entire continent before you can even leave the borders, this is a doorway to the rest of the world, this sport. And for me, I've had interviews here with people from Warsaw, England, Switzerland, South America. That's the part, I think, more than the soccer itself, that I will cherish. And I'm already kind of nostalgic about it and a little sad that it's almost over.
Well, possibly the most memorable meeting between England and Argentina came at the 1986 World Cup in Mexico. Diego Maradona's infamous hand of God goal helped Argentina to 2-1 win. And the ball in that game is up for auction. It's expected to sell for more than $10 million. We'll have another World Cup update later on, but still ahead on Al Jazeera. Betting on escalation. We'll take a look at Donald Trump's strategy in Iran. Next on This is America.
The latest news as it breaks.
After 4 months, the school needs the building back, so the families are relocating, and not all to the same place.
With in-depth reports.
For Iran's leadership, the ceremonies are about more than mourning. They're also a public display of continuity after the assassination.
From the heart of the story.
The announcement may signal that Hamas is willing to step back from directly governing Gaza.
In its exploration of how and why societies descend into genocide, Al Jazeera Untangles begins with the horrors of Darfur.
Violence that requires buy-in from the most senior leadership of a state.
Go and do what you must and don't report back.
No action from the rest of the world to meaningfully stop this violence.
Sudan, Darfur's genocide, on Al Jazeera.
You're watching Al Jazeera. A reminder of our top stories here this hour. US President Donald Trump says Iran has released an American citizen from detention as a gesture of goodwill. He says she was wrongfully detained since 2024 and is now safely outside Iran. The US military says it's disabled an oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. US Central Command says the Curacao flag tanker was en route to Iran's Karg Island when it was targeted for trying to breach the US blockade. And separately, the US military has announced it's launched another series of strikes against Iran. This is the second wave of attacks in just one day. Iran launched a series of retaliatory strikes across the region. Time to hand you over now to Alex Marquand and the rest of the team in Washington, D.C. for This is America.
This is America, and this is the White House. It's from here that President Donald Trump has launched a new wave of strikes on Iran and has reimposed the blockade on Iranian ports. Is the president escalating a war that was supposed to be winding down, or is he simply trying to force Tehran back to the bargaining table on his terms? I'll have more on all of that in just a moment, but first, let's go to Alex Marquardt in our Washington, D.C. studio.
Thanks very much, Rosalind. Donald Trump often frames power dynamics as a simple balance. Which holds the cards? With Iran, the U.S. commander-in-chief of the world's most powerful military is finding out that a strong hand isn't necessarily the same as a winning one. And somewhere in the middle here sits a ceasefire agreement that both sides now read differently, with 90 million Iranians and a global economy waiting to find out what happens next. 4 months into this war that Donald Trump said would take just a few weeks, he appears to be betting on escalation. Rory Challens looks at the options.
Trump's generals reportedly cautioned him against war with Iran. Too risky and too unpredictable. But the US president, he fancied the odds. And now, 4 months into a war he thought would last 4 to 5 weeks, the US is locked in a high-stakes contest with a questionable hand. Trump says the deal he signed with Iran is over. And now he's choosing escalation.
No, I gave them a chance. I wanted to give them a chance at making a deal. You know, we had a deal 2 days ago. It was done. They couldn't do it. They didn't like something about the deal. They couldn't do it. And they shot first, and that was a big mistake that they shot first, because we have been knocking the hell out of them.
The cards he's played: new military strikes and restoring the blockade. For days, the US has bombed military targets across Iran. Trump says bridges and power plants are next. And the US Navy has restored its blockade in the Gulf of any ship trading with Iran. As ever, Trump wants to cash in, but announcing that he would charge international shipping for US protection through the Straits of Hormuz didn't sit well with allies.
I was called by different people, different countries, kings and emirs and all of the people that we all know and we all love, and they've been very strong partners. And they said, we'd love to do it a different way. We'd love to engage with billions and billions of dollars.
But what of Iran? It has cards too. its proven willingness to absorb punishment, military and economic, and its ace, the ability to choke off the Hormuz Straits and send drones and missiles at US bases and regional allies. And there's another factor here: time. US midterm elections are in November. This war is unpopular with the public. Trump is impatient for something that looks like a victory. The world's most powerful military, a death toll now in the thousands, and still Trump hasn't found the winning hand. Rory Challens, Al Jazeera.
Let's bring in Rosalind Jordan, who is at the White House, and Manuel Rapallo, who is standing by at the State Department. Rosalind, to you first. Donald Trump has really ratcheted up these threats against Iran. Do we have a sense of how far militarily he is willing to go?
The U.S. President Donald Trump has said several times this week that he is willing to expand U.S. military action against Iran, and not just targeting military facilities, storage depots, missile launch sites, vessels that may still exist as part of the Iranian Navy, but he has also raised the specter of targeting what can be considered civilian targets, power plants, bridges, and other parts of the Iranian infrastructure. That is legally very questionable. That has brought criticism against the Trump administration before, earlier in this war. But Donald Trump says he is committed to making the Iranians actually agree to a deal that would ensure not just U.S. national security, but global security as well. One of the Trump administration's main tenets is that it does not want to see Iran develop a nuclear weapon arsenal. It also does not want to see Iran continue to carry out what the U.S. calls human rights violations, arresting, punishing, and killing people for expressing political views not in sync with that of the central government in Tehran. So while Donald Trump says there is still a possibility for diplomacy, right now his commitment, he says, is to ratcheting up military action against the Iranian government.
All right, thank you, Rosalind Jordan there at the White House. Let's go over to Manuel Rapallo at the State Department. Manuel, in terms of diplomatic options, what are still available?
Well, the signaling that we're hearing from U.S. officials, at least here at the U.S. State Department, is that military pressure and diplomacy are not mutually exclusive here. Administration officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, have said repeatedly and consistently that the preference is diplomacy. But the argument from the Trump White House has been that deterrence is still necessary, which is why they're pursuing this sort of two-pronged parallel approach: military pressure, economic pressure, alongside diplomacy. The argument is that any agreements that have been made, including the recent MOU, have failed because of violations on the side of Tehran here, leaving Washington with little other option other than to increase its military pressure. So from a diplomatic point of view, yes, the momentum when it comes to diplomacy has started to stall, you might say. We've seen a focus more on military pressure, on economic pressure. But with that said, there is a separate diplomatic track that's taking place. We can point to Secretary of State Marco Rubio's recent meeting on Tuesday with the Jordanian Foreign Minister. President Trump met with the new Prime Minister of Iraq, also at the White House on Tuesday. All of these bilateral and multilateral meetings that are taking place on the periphery are all part of the broader diplomatic effort, not only to stabilize the region, but to bring the conflict with Iran toward a diplomatic off-ramp, and also prevent the sort of spillover that could lead to a scenario where the wider region could be pulled into a broader conflict.
Yeah, a flurry of diplomatic activity. Of course, the question is, will it actually lead to anything? Manuel Rapallo at the State Department, thank you so much. Joining us to discuss this further is David Hale. He's a former U.S. ambassador and special envoy for Middle East peace, as well as Robert Obeda, the former director for maritime industrial policy at the National Security Council at the White House. Ambassador Robert, thank you both for joining us as things really escalate quite dramatically. It is clear that this war is back on, and that for now the ceasefire is dead. Trump talking about ratcheting up the targeting of Iran. I want to play a little bit more of what may be coming.
We're going to hit them very hard tonight. We're going to hit them very hard tomorrow night. We're going to hit them very hard the night after. And then Next week, it gets really bad for them because next week comes the power plants. Next week comes the bridges. We're going to knock out all their power plants. We're going to knock out all their bridges unless they get to the table and negotiate.
So Trump there really laying out what could be coming down the pike for Iran. Ambassador, when you hear the president talk like that, and what you've seen over the course of the past few days, does this feel like a punch on the nose, if you will, to get the talks back on track? Or is the U.S. really settling into a more prolonged military campaign?
I think my reading, anyway, of the president's approach to this is that he's trying to restore deterrence, which had been lost in perhaps an overeager, at least perceived by the Iranians as an overeager American effort to get these negotiations going. And I think they tried to exploit that and see what further control they could, extract from the whole situation. So I think the president is, whether it's intended to resume negotiations or intended to hunker down into a long-term conflict, either way, a necessary first step is restoring deterrence.
And of course, in terms of what could happen militarily, a major question is whether the U.S. sends in forces on the ground. Do you see any signals pointing to that possibility?
Not yet. I do think that if there's going to be a long-term strategy to secure the Strait of Hormuz, to open it for free navigation, it's probably going to entail a much more significant deployment than the American public is yet prepared for.
Robert, this blockade, which had been briefly lifted when the ceasefire was struck, is now back on. What do you think the administration thinks they can accomplish, and how different would it be from the last blockade?
I think they're looking to gain leverage so that they can go back to the negotiating table and have with an upper hand, right? The intent is to deny Iranian access to the strait while preserving freedom of navigation, which inherently gives us an upper hand at the negotiating table.
And how different is that from what we actually saw before? Because the blockade went into effect not long after the war started at the end of February.
I think on the surface it's not very different. The objective remains the same. I think that the tools that we're applying there are changing quite a lot, actually, and so it remains to be seen whether or not this will give us the leverage that we need to come to a lasting agreement, diplomatic agreement.
Obviously, the Strait of Hormuz is something that we're going to be discussing in depth today, so I want to provide a little bit more context for our viewers. This is a major point of contention between Iran and the U.S., of course, competing claims from either side over security and the flow of global energy through that very strategic waterway. Our Eva McCann explains.
The Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important maritime choke points. At its narrowest point, it's only about 20 miles, or roughly 33 kilometers wide. But this narrow corridor connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil moves through here, along with other critical energy supplies headed to markets around the globe. Now, on a typical day, more than 100 oil tankers and commercial vessels transit these shipping lanes. During the latest exchange of strikes between the United States and Iran, traffic slowed dramatically as shipping companies reassessed the risk. Some vessels delayed entering the strait, others waited offshore. This all spells chaos. Insurance costs climbed, freight rates increased, oil prices surged in their highest daily jump in 6 years, as traders worried the conflict could again disrupt global supplies. Now, a U.S. military blockade is back in effect, enforced by 20 U.S. Navy warships and hundreds of aircraft operating in the region. The administration says it is aimed at restricting Iranian maritime activity, not closing the Strait of Hormuz to all commercial traffic. Iran says its control over the strait will not be compromised. But even when shipping lanes remain technically open, heightened military activity can make companies think twice before sending vessels through one of the world's busiest energy corridors. So in the coming days, we wait and watch whether commercial traffic can recover, whether oil prices continue to climb, and whether either side escalates in a way that makes this narrow stretch of water even more dangerous.
Ambassador Hale, have you heard from this administration any kind of coherent explanation of what the end game is and where they want to be? Are we essentially trying to get back to a place where we were before, the free flow of commerce through Hormuz?
Well, I think the situation in Hormuz is an immediate, obviously, problem that needs to be tackled. But the longer-term strategy, as I interpret it, and the administration has said varying things, but is to neutralize Iran, to make sure that it can no longer project power in the region the way it did before. I mean, before 2023, they were setting the timetable through violence in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq,
through
in
proxies.
Gaza, through proxies and directly with the Yemenis. So I think is to turn the table against that. And actually, there's been a great deal of progress in that, but it has not been brought to completion.
Robert, do you see a strategy here that makes sense, or does it feel like, as some have said, jazz to some extent, that they're making it up as they go along?
No, I don't think they're making it up as they go along. I think conflicts are dynamic and constantly changing. You have, three traditional instruments available to you when you're engaging on this front. You have the military, you have economic measures, and you have diplomacy. You're constantly tweaking them to accomplish your objectives as things change. So I think, it's just a reflection of the fact that, the only thing certain about war is that it's uncertain, and you constantly have to adjust.
And there are obviously a lot of other partners for both countries that would like to see this come to an end quite quickly. In terms of mediators, we've seen the Pakistanis have a central role, the Qataris, the Omanis. Ambassador, how frantically are these mediators trying to get the parties back to the table? And how are the regional allies of the U.S., the Gulf allies, feeling right now?
Yeah, well, my guess is that the Qataris and the Pakistanis in particular, who have big fingerprints on this agreement, are trying to restore some semblance of negotiations. The problem is the Iranians are showing disrespect for everybody. They're not acting in good faith. So I doubt that they're going to be able to launch anything meaningful very fast. What I've seen in the last, this period of conflict is that the Gulf states are actually uniting behind America and against Iran. That Iranian behavior is not winning them friends, it's winning them enemies throughout the region. So while there may be differences from one state to the other in terms of degree of vulnerability, all of them understand that the American security umbrella is their necessary future.
When you look at what's going on in the Strait, Robert, do you think that Iran is flexing that leverage in a way that they have not before?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we've seen is that Iran has determined that they don't actually need to beat the U.S. Navy to get the leverage that they're looking for, right? All they need to do is create enough uncertainty to scare shippers and insurance providers and energy markets in order to get that leverage. So they're absolutely using it in a new way.
Why can't American firepower, overwhelming American firepower, certainly when you compare the two militaries, why can't the U.S. solve things that way?
Because I think fundamentally this isn't a military problem, right? You can provide a certain level of security for vessels, but you just can't eliminate risk. And I think that uncertainty is ultimately what the private industry and commercial markets look to. So yeah, the military has to be coupled with economic measures and diplomacy in order for this to be truly successful.
On the diplomatic side, Ambassador, you just mentioned the Iranians and the lack of good faith efforts. And one other thing that's also been reported is a divide among the Iranian negotiators, let's say the IRGC versus some of the others. How important do you think that schism is in terms of being able to get to a more peaceful stage?
I personally think it tends to be exaggerated. The people in charge are the IRGC. That's what we saw during the prolonged funeral arrangements for the late Ayatollah. And they're going to call the shots at the end of the day. Now, they may want one day to show a more pragmatic face to the world and another day to show a more violent face, and that is what we're seeing. On again, off again negotiations, on again, off again violence.
The document that took us to the ceasefire that has now been broken was called an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding. And this is the part about the Strait of Hormuz. Quote, Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days only. Robert, that strikes me as extremely vague, and it now seems the two sides are interpreting that differently.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I mean, the ambassador knows better than I do, but when you're negotiating these agreements, you start with the sort of low-hanging fruit that brings you closer to the middle, and you're left with the hard-charging issues. And oftentimes, you insert a degree of ambiguity there to, ensure that you have the ability to maneuver. At the end of the day, as he mentioned earlier, it all boils down to the actions you take after that. And if the Iranians are not going to stick to the intent of the MOU, then it all sort of falls apart.
One notion. Go ahead, Ambassador.
Well, I react a bit to the idea that somehow this agreement gave the Iranians carte blanche, that if they were unhappy with the arrangements to facilitate the freedom of navigation through the straits, that they could then just bomb things. That's not what the agreement says. And an MOU is a statement of intent. So if there's no goodwill and no good intent, then it's useless. And that is what we're reacting to.
What explanation is there for the Iranians going out and bombing commercial ships?
Because I think they thought that the American administration was so keen to get an agreement and into negotiations that they had the Iranians had their own calculation about our midterms and the economic costs, and they were interpreting statements in our politics and thought that the president was just going to go along with this. Well, he didn't. So they miscalculated.
One notion that has been now raised by both sides is one of tolls or fees for passage in the Strait of Hormuz. The president said yesterday that the U.S. would apply it. He then quickly backtracked that. And then he also said on Tuesday that the Gulf countries had proposed an alternative. Take a listen.
I don't think anybody should be able to charge a fee for the strait or for any other strait relationship in terms of other sections of the world. I don't think anybody should be really in that position. But we were doing it as a reimbursement. The Gulf states are going to invest a tremendous amount of money into the United States, and that was very satisfactory to me. I think it's actually much better.
Robert, what do you make of this whiplash of American positions?
Strategic adjustments, they happen all the time. Again, the objective here is to create leverage that you can bring to the negotiating table over the Iranians. It's not to get leverage over our partners and allies. In fact, having their support is, as a coalition, gives us the leverage that we're looking for. So it's an adjustment.
When it comes to oil prices, there's been a lot of discussion around that. Obviously, they've gone up in the past few days. We are looking at the midterms in just a couple of months. Obviously, this is a very politically sensitive issue. Ambassador, how sensitive do you think this administration is to those rising prices?
Well, no one wants to lose an election, and obviously Americans are concerned about inflation, and those are a big part of that. Never, I was a State Department diplomat in 1884. Just a few years ago, and I changed foreign policy because of a midterm election calculation, even when it was so obvious that a course correction might have helped. 2000 was it 2000 and I think was a phenomenal example, and the Iraq War.
This president's not running again, as far as we know.
Possibly. Yeah.
I want to play a remarkable piece of video for our viewers that Central Command, CENTCOM, which is carrying out the military operation in the region, released a few days ago. It's the first time that they have shown sea drones in combat. And the video that they posted shows 3 of these sea drones striking an Iranian submarine and a ship maintenance facility. Robert, when you look at this video from CENTCOM, what do you make of them releasing it, and really what it means for the future of warfare and maritime security?
Yeah, I think it's remarkable. I think it's the first time that the United States has used vessel-like drones in combat. And the decision to release this video was intended to send a message to the Iranians. It's a preview of what's to come. And what's to come is the use of a small number of high-end naval vessels to secure the strait is not a long-term strategy, but instead the use of sort of autonomous vessels that allow for a persistent presence in the maritime domain is the future and what's to come.
And now you are in the private sector, still obviously dealing with maritime issues. How much are sea drones a part of the conversation, whether they're American or belong to others?
They're very much a part of the conversation. They have been in the Ukraine for a long time, and I think the United States military is starting to really take them seriously and see them as a tool that they can use to maintain leverage in situations like this.
Yeah, for years we have seen the Ukrainians using the equivalent to great effect against the Russians. And so this is, in some ways, the U.S. catching up to what the Ukrainians have taught us, and there are many examples of that. Ambassador, as you noted, you were a diplomat for a long time all across the region. When you look at what is happening now and what might be coming, how worried are you about this spreading and Iranian proxies like the Houthis having a more active role, or do you think it could stay relatively contained?
I think momentum is working against the Iranians. Their proxies, at least key ones, have really been decimated. They still have potency, but they're nothing like what they were before. I'm talking about Hezbollah, Hamas. We've seen the Iraqi prime ministers here in Washington talking about our alliance and our relationship there to deal with the Iranian problem. There are talks going on in Rome between the Lebanese and Israelis to deal with the common problem of Iran and Hezbollah. Obviously, the Iranians and Hezbollah are not going to just stand aside and let this happen. They will fight back. They will try to use violence and terrorism to undercut these things, and we need to be alert to that, but not deterred by those kinds of threats.
When the U.S. goes back to war and ratchets things up the way that we have seen and we could see, what does that mean for the strength of the Iranian regime?
It's very resilient. There's no denying that, partly because they really don't care about the fate of their people. I mean, I don't know what the real numbers are, but there are estimates of 30 to 35,000 were slaughtered in January. So they don't care about the economic pressure on their people. They do about the economic pressure on their regime. And so we have to have a long-term, persistent strategy that combines the elements that Robert was outlining: military, economic, political, diplomatic pressure, and stick to it. Because one of the problems with American foreign policy in this part of the world is persistence. We often lose interest or lose our stomach for what's going on.
But to that point, Robert, how long can the U.S. persist when it comes to this blockade? It can't go on endlessly.
I think the U.S. can sustain this for quite a long time. You know, we've seen that the short-term strategy here is to use naval vessels. We've seen from that video that there's a long-term strategy that doesn't require deploying exquisite assets into the region. So we can sustain this for quite a while. I think the real question is whether or not sustained presence is going to give us the leverage that we need at the negotiating table.
I think we'd be remiss, Ambassador, if we didn't mention Israel in this conversation. Of course, they have played a huge role in this. They helped co-launch the war, if you will. They helped take out the supreme leader. And yet they've been relatively sidelined. Where do you think they stand in their eagerness to get back involved militarily?
Well, the war has been quite popular in Israel,
right.
The conduct of the conflict. And there's an election coming at the end of October, so that is going to influence everything. I think that the Israeli leadership was quite concerned about the direction of the U.S.-Iran MOU. We have seen some of the vulnerabilities in that agreement. It's now back on track in a way I think the Israelis are probably much more comfortable with. Look, the gap between America and Iran is enormous on the issues that divide us. So we in Israel and our Arab allies have to think again about a long-term game plan here. We can't think in terms of short-term victories. Long-term success means a long-term strategy.
And then, of course, there's the nuclear file. And we only have a couple moments left. But if the war ended today, the strait opened back up, there's still a long way in terms of bridging any kind of agreement when it comes to nuclear issues.
Yes, and so we may have to continue to be vigilant and use our intelligence and our military assets to make sure that that program doesn't get any closer to realization.
Robert, before I let you go, we just have a couple seconds left. How do you see things playing out in the Strait in the next few days? I was looking at a maritime traffic map today. It's quite crowded in there.
It does, but I don't think it takes much to create uncertainty, and ultimately that leads to the disruptions that everybody's so concerned about. So I think the sooner that we are able to deploy large fleets of autonomous vessels that can maintain persistent presence, the better for everybody.
All right. Robert Obeda, who was at the National Security Council under President Joe Biden. David Hale, old Middle East hand as U.S. Ambassador and Special Envoy for Middle East Peace. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And that's all from the team here in Washington. I'm going to hand back to Rosalind Jordan at the White House and Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Alex. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of This is America. That's at 18:30 GMT, Monday through Friday, or if you're here in the United States, 2:30 p.m. Eastern. Have a good one.
A weekly look at the world's top business stories.
Are we looking at a strong possibility of a global financial crisis? What is on the horizon for the world?
From global markets and economies.
China's putting laser-like focus on building up that middle class in Africa.
Counting the cost on Al Jazeera.
Sadiq Saleh is among the thousands of subsistence farmers in central Yemen facing an existential crisis. Many months have passed with